Well, good morning and welcome to Lake Oconee Church. So glad that you have decided to take a little bit of your Sunday to come spend with us. What is a beautiful day outside, is it not? So glad that you are here today. If we have not met, my name is Morgan. I'm on staff here and really just grateful to be able to spend a morning with you here at Lake Oconee Church. One of the things that I wanted to ask this morning is how many of you watched the coronation of the King yesterday? Anybody? You saw maybe a highlight video, something on the news, something like that, yeah? I loved the comment of one of the newscasters. He said, if it was not raining, it would not be England, right? Loved that. I thought that was very appropriate. If you've ever been to England, you know that it just rains like literally 24/7. That's just the weather. You know, pack a jacket every day. That's just what you do. But it's amazing how complicated the whole thing was, right? There was so much pomp and circumstance around. It got really complicated at one point, and everyone's trying to like maneuver and work out what's going on. But I must say, it's definitely not something simple. Like, this little thing, which is a slinky, right? Some things in life are just simple, just kind of like this little toy. It's a basic toy that pretty much everyone here has played with or at least seen and understands, but kind of as we grow up, things get a lot more complicated, right? It's not like a simple basic toy that everyone's played with. It gets really, really complicated. As we get older, things just get complicated. That's the fact of life. And so today we're starting a brand new series, and we're going to discuss kind of what the foundation, what the basic principles of our faith are. And we're going to look at that over the next couple of weeks in a series that's called The Fundamental List. And so I'm really glad that you have joined us here today for the beginning of that series. Now, if you are here today and the first time you're joining us, welcome. Glad you're here. Our guest services team has put together a gift for you, and you can pick that up directly after the service in the studio. It is not a slinky. But it is something pretty cool. Now, I just want to let you know about something. 6 weeks ago, we updated that gift, okay? And I have been trying for the last 6 weeks to try and get my hands on one of those gifts, but my accent's worn off. Everyone knows that I'm not new around here, and so I'm trying to find a way that I can get my hands on one of those gifts. So if you're a guest here today and you're wondering about whether you should stop by. If not for you, for me, because I really need one of those in my life, okay? And so you really want to stop by. You can pick that up directly after the service. That's at the studio. If you head out these doors on the left-hand side, you can, the glass room at the intersection of the hallways there, you can head on there and grab that gift directly after the service. And if you're our guest online, you can go to guest.lakeoconee.church and we'll drop something in your inbox, which I think you're going to enjoy using this week as well. Thanks so much for joining us online. Well, in a moment, we're going to keep this morning going. We're going to sing 3 encouraging songs with Amy and Ashley. So right now, I'd love to invite you to stand up. Say hello to someone around you. Tell them if you remember playing with a slinky or if you spent more time untangling a slinky growing up.
Who am I that the highest king would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the sun sets free. Oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last, his ransom, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Who the sun sets free, oh, he's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I You don't just tolerate us, you don't have somewhere to go. We're not your trophy children, you abandon when we roam. Your mercy's not a favor, and your presence isn't rushed. Oh no, our God is love. The cross was not a vehicle for you to finally care. When I look upon your character, your grace was always there. Acceptance not withheld from us, no need to measure up. Oh no, our God is love. And his arms are open for all to gather here. The cross has spoken. There's nothing left to fear. Once and for all he showed how far his grace will go for us. Our God is love. And how vast the Father's heart for us will never reach the end. I thought for sure I found it, but he proved me wrong again. So much higher, so much wider, so much deeper than we know. Oh, our God is love, and his arms are open for all to gather here. The cross has spoken. There's nothing left to fear. Once and for all he showed how far his grace will go for us. Our God is love. And whatever picture I have isn't big enough. Whatever picture I have isn't good enough. Whatever picture I have couldn't sum you up. I couldn't sum you up. Whatever picture I have isn't big enough. Oh no. And whatever picture I have isn't good enough. Whatever picture I have couldn't sum you up. It couldn't sum you up. Oh, yeah. overflowing. Our God is love, overcoming every grave, overwhelming all our shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love. And His arms are open for all to gather. Here the cross has spoken. There's nothing left to fear. Once and for all He showed how far His grace would go for us. Our God is love, overcoming every grave, overwhelming all our shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love, overcoming every grave, overwhelming all our shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love. Well, Jesus said that in the world you will have trouble, but take heart because I have overcome the world. And I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life, even really recently, when I felt like everything around me was shaking. And I had to think about those words from Jesus, those words of comfort and of you're not alone. And I'm walking through this life and you can look to me and I'm going to be with you. And I think when those things happen, those circumstances come, we really figure out what ground we're standing on. And this is a chance to just remind our hearts that Jesus is a firm foundation. And when circumstances around us cause everything to feel so unsteady and so unstable, we can stand on Him. We can stand on that rock. We invite you to sing this with us. Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus, 'cause He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would He fail now? He won't. He won't. And I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. So I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I built my life on Jesus, and He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would He fail now? He won't. No, He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. No, no, no. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. Christ is my firm foundation. He's the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. Oh, I Rain came, wind blew, but my house was built on you. I'm safe with you, and I'm gonna make it through. Sing that with us. Yeah, rain came and wind blew, but my house was built on you. I'm safe with you, and I'm gonna make it through. Yeah, I'm gonna make it through, 'cause I'm standing strong on you, yeah. Oh, I'm gonna make it through, 'cause my house was built on you. Christ is my firm foundation. He's the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. Oh, I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus, 'cause He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would He fail now? He won't. Oh, He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. No, He won't. No, He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. We are so grateful to sing these songs, these truths, these reminders with you this morning, and we want to invite you to grab a seat.
As we sing, your mind may go back to whatever moment it is that you feel the most tension around. He won't fail me, but right in this moment, I don't know where He is. I don't see my Heavenly Father involved in my life and in my story. But what's fascinating is as we look back at the circumstances where maybe we felt that in the past, where we sensed that in the past, where we knew that we were going through some difficult moments in the past, whether that's 6 months ago or a year ago or 5 years ago or sometimes 10 years ago. But we can see over time how our Heavenly Father did not abandon us, but was working even in the most stressful, the most messy, the most difficult of circumstances. And He did not abandon us. And you know, that's true for His movement, the church, as well. And I was reminded recently that it was just 1 year ago this weekend that a lot of us were standing over there someplace, peering out a door into a big gravel parking lot, and we grabbed one of these cards and we said, hey, I want to be a part of what God does next through Lake Oconee Church. And a lot of us, we committed to be a part of helping phase 2 happen. And what was so amazing is that was a year ago this weekend. Since then, not only have we opened that building, but we've been able to leverage that additional space to create individualized spaces for our babies and preschoolers, our elementary kids, our middle and high school students, and us as adults. We've been able to create events where young families have been able to say, we are dedicating our child and we're committing to raise them to follow Jesus. Where elementary parents have been able to celebrate as their child has said, hey, I've trusted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and I want to highlight that by being baptized. We've created some events for our middle and high school students, and we've been able to serve our community in some really extraordinary ways through this facility, all in the space of that year. Honestly, in that space of the 2 months since we've been open in this additional space. So thank you to the many of you who have leaned in, to those of you who a year ago thought, where will God be in this process? And we now can look back and see his hand through this time. And at that time, we said, hey, this is a 24-month initiative that we're going to be a part of. And so we are 1/2 of the way through that initiative toward funding what we have been able to create here. So thank you for the way that you have leaned in to help make this a reality. And for many of you, you've leaned into our overriding mission of inspiring people to follow Jesus. And you give weekly in the buckets that are at the back of the room. You give online through our website at give.lakeoconee.church. And I'm so grateful for your part in what's happening, not only for your family, but for the family that's sitting alongside you and across the room from you and in a different hour than you. Well, if you have any interest in knowing more about what's happening at our church, what's happening behind the scenes, if you're newer to our church and would say, hey, I'm very curious what it means to inspire people to follow Jesus and how does that happen at this church, I would love the chance to have that conversation with you. Maybe you have questions about how you and your family can get a little more connected, or maybe you just have questions about how some things happen behind the scenes. And I would love to invite you to a special event. It takes 15 minutes, and it's held in our next room right after this morning's service. So if you could, in your mind, just take 15 minutes after the service and block it out in your mind. We'll continue to watch your kids. And I would love the chance to meet you and answer some of those questions and give you some really practical options for how you might get involved beyond simply sitting in a row on Sunday. Well, around here, if you've been here for more than a couple of weeks, you know that we have a variety of speakers. And sometimes they're live on our stage, as it has been over the past couple of weeks. And sometimes they're live from a nearby campus, as is the case this morning, as we lean into a brand new series entitled The Fundamental List. And this morning, we're going to hear from Andy Stanley as he begins to unpack this first part of our series. But before we get there, as one of your pastors who lives right here alongside you in Georgia's Lake Country, I would love the chance to pray with you and for you. So let's take a second to do that. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your love to us. And we're mindful that we do live in a broken world and things aren't perfect and they aren't smooth and they aren't easy. And yet you don't leave us hanging in the middle of that. And in fact, many times you turn those situations and use them so that our lives would reflect you even better. And God, I pray for those who are hurting this morning, for those who are really grappling with some tough stuff, some relational struggles, some health struggles, some things at home. God, I pray that even in those situations, that you would remind us all that you don't fail us, that you don't leave us hanging in the middle of the most difficult things in our lives. And God, as we dive into this message this morning, I pray that for those of us who have been asking questions about our faith, that you would allow this to ground us even further. For those of us who are tracking with you, that you would give us language to use around what we hold on to so deeply. But for all of us, God, help us to grow one more step in keeping with you in our faith journey today. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.
As most of you know by now, about 2.5 weeks ago, my father passed away. And on my Instagram post that week, that was my cry day. I mean, there's been other cries, but if you've lost a parent or someone like that, there's like a day where you're just a mess. So on my cry day, I posted on Instagram about my last conversation with my dad. And of course, I didn't know it was my last conversation. And if those of you at North Point Community Church a few weeks ago when I was here last, I actually talked a little bit about that conversation at that point, not knowing that would be the last time I would have a conversation with my dad in this life. And the reason that I bring that up now is not to make you sad. It's because in my last conversation with him, I told him about this series. And my dad loved to talk about preaching. He loved to talk about theology. He loved to talk about the Bible. He loved to talk about the things that he'd heard I said that he was sure I didn't say, and could I please explain them? We had a lot of those conversations. People would whisper in his ear, Andy doesn't believe the Bible, Andy doesn't believe the Old Testament, all these crazy things. So we would laugh about that because then I would remind him about all the crazy things people said about him through the years, and it was just wonderful. So he said, what are you preaching on next? So I told him about the series we're about to begin today, and I went through the whole series with him. And I said, what would you say about this? And what would you say about this? And what would be the best approach to that? And he was so excited. In fact, the next day, his CEO came to see him, Philip Bowen. And Philip told me this on Wednesday after my dad passed on Tuesday. He said, my last conversation with your dad, he told me, he said, and take this the right way, he said, Philip, I finally understand what Andy is doing. So my theory is that maybe God took him before somebody confused him again. I don't know. I'm just making that part up. Okay, don't take that too seriously. I finally understand what Andy's doing. Sometimes he just says things differently, but he's bringing people in and he's leading them to the truth. And basically, just acknowledge that he and I have been basically doing the same thing for both of our lives. So as we were talking about this series, he sometimes he on Sunday mornings for the last few years, he's been confined to his home. He would watch, and take this the right way, he would get up on Sunday mornings and watch himself on television, and then he would watch me. And so we were on two different channels. So he said, you know what? After I told him about the series we're about to do, he's like, I want to see that, but I don't want to wait until it's on television. I'm like, well, so he promised me he was going to watch this entire series because we had so much conversation about it that night. And now, I don't know how heaven works, but I guess he can stay for both services. So anyway, I want to say thank you for I got to get through this quick, for the extraordinary outpouring of love and concern and flowers and the notes. I mean, the notes. And for my whole life, people have walked up and said, Andy, I've been listening to your dad for 20 years, 30 years. 40 years, and then, of course, I've gotten so much of that, and my response is always, I've been listening to him longer, except you probably did what he said to do. Not so much me when I was in high school. But anyway, so I just want to say thank you, and I will, of course, miss him forever. Now, we're going to switch gears without a clutch and jump into this series that he and I discussed that I'm so excited about. And I want to welcome all of those of you who are joining us from all of our Atlanta area churches. And for those of you who are joining us from all over the world, I didn't greet our online audience, but thanks so much for tuning in. It is so fun and exciting to see a growing network of men and women and teenagers and college students who are discovering what it means to not just be Christian, but to follow Jesus. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks. So today we're beginning this brand new series, and the title is, or we've entitled it, The Fundamental List. And I love this title, and I did not come up with it. The Fundamental List. The subtitle is Recovering the Essentials of Our Faith. So for the next few weeks, we're going to attempt to answer the question, what must a person believe, not do, but what must a person believe in order to be a faithful follower of Jesus? Now, we talk all the time about what you do to follow Jesus, and we're going to continue to talk about that because it's not just believing that makes a difference, it's doing that makes a difference. But it's a legitimate question to ask, as if I'm going to be a Christian, what do I have to believe? What's essential to believe? What's fundamental? What's the bare minimum? What's the can't do without? And the reason this is such a confusing question for so many of us, and it's nobody's fault, it's just the nature of things. The reason this is so confusing is the Christian faith is kind of like a giant house of living rooms. way bigger than this. This is just a sampling. A giant house just filled with living rooms, and each of the living rooms has a double door to the outside, and then it's got all these hidden passageways to all the other living rooms because people are constantly changing churches, changing denominations, changing faith traditions. They marry somebody from a different faith tradition, so they leave theirs to join hers or to join his. So there's all these, people can swap around. And everybody, each of these is constantly inviting people into their faith, their Christian faith tradition. But as you know, and this is where it gets a little bumpy, each one of these faith traditions, including the many, many, many that aren't listed here, they all have their own terms and conditions. Their own terms and conditions, their own traditions, their own expectations, their own, in some cases, versions of the Bible. In some cases, their own interpretation of their version of the Bible. And the main thing, there's only two things that all of these have in common. We'll get to the second one in a minute. But one of the only things that all these groups, and we're part of one of these groups, one of the only things that they have in common is that they're confident that they're right and that everybody else is not right or not as right or misinformed or uninformed or maybe misled. And the truth is, and I willingly acknowledge this, there's probably a sense in which every single Christian faith tradition, including ours, including my theology, we're all probably wrong about some things. But hopefully we're not wrong about the main things, the essential things. So here's the question. What is fundamental to the Christian faith? What is the must believe? What's indispensable? What's necessary? What's crucial? Got to have it. What's central? Got to keep it front and center. And what's required in terms of what you believe to be a faithful follower of Jesus? And as important, and especially with what's going on in our culture right now as it relates to faith systems, as important is this question: what's not? What's not essential? What's not fundamental? What's peripheral, right? What's cultural? This is just our culture, but over time, what we do culturally, we think is an essential. What's comfortable? This is just what we like. And after a while, we like it so much, we think, well, this is how everybody ought to do it, and if you're not doing it the way we do it that's comfortable for us, you're probably not doing it right. What's fashionable? It's kind of modern. So, when you're I've been part of, what's called sometimes the modern church movement. I don't like that phrase, but I didn't make it up. The modern church movement, it's kind of fashionable. It's the music, and it's the vibe, and it's the casual thing. It's fashionable. What's traditional? And what's harmful? So there are peripheral things, and it's so easy to get these confused, and that's why this is so important. It's so important. Well, let me illustrate it this way. The reason it's so important, you've heard this phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You've heard this before. You've used this before. This is actually, I looked this up. I didn't know where it came from. It's a 16th century German idiom that actually was created to serve as a warning, and it is a warning. And so here's kind of the clunky definition of what it means not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In your zeal to rid yourself of something unwanted or harmful, which you should have energy and zeal around removing, harmful things from your life, unwanted things, here's the warning part, don't accidentally or don't inadvertently rid yourself of something valuable and important. That in your zeal to rid yourself of something unwanted or harmful, don't accidentally or inadvertently rid yourself of something valuable and important. And the reason I wanted to do this series is I'm so burdened by the fact that so many people, to use this terminology, are throwing baby Jesus out with their church bathwater, okay? They don't like something about their church, and they just walk away from the whole thing. And probably everybody listening or everybody in this room at some point along the way, that has been a temptation, or maybe, as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, maybe that's your experience. And it's understandable, and here's why. Because in every generation, not just our generation, we think it's just us because this is when we live. In every generation, this is amazing, beginning with the beginning of the 2nd century, this has always been the case. In every generation, new and novel and sometimes toxic, sometimes cruel, sometimes divisive and harmful, even dangerous teaching and opinions get woven into certain streams of Christianity. And these new and novel and sometimes harmful ideas are often, in fact, many times, are elevated to the status of doctrine Or dogma, this is what you have to do. Or theology, this is what the Bible teaches. This is what Scripture teaches. This is just true of God. And so these new and novel ideas that come along, they get woven into not all streams of Christianity, but some streams of Christianity, and they become so central, people begin to think they are essential. People begin to think this is fundamental. This is actually what Christianity is all about. Non-essentials, considered essential. And if you're in one of these faith traditions that have some of these crazy things woven in, and when I say crazy, some of them are harmful, some of them are just interesting, some of them are just kind of weird, some of them are kind of odd, and they're not harmful, they're just different. But the idea is when you're in a faith tradition that has some of these things woven in, if you reject those things, then you're out. If you reject even what are really not essentials that are now considered essential by faith tradition, you're considered an unbeliever, or you're out, or you're not a Christian, and you kind of find yourself on the out. But oftentimes, and this is what we're going to do for the next few weeks, oftentimes when you take these peripheral things, when you take these things that get woven in over time, when you take these things that really aren't essential and aren't fundamental, and you hold them up next to the teaching of Jesus. In other words, you follow Jesus through the Gospels and you're like, I just don't see him talking about this. I don't see him emphasizing this. In fact, I think he de-emphasizes what my church emphasizes or what my faith tradition emphasizes. When held up against Jesus in the Gospels, they're clearly oftentimes not fundamental to what he taught or what he modeled. They may not be harmful, but they're not necessarily essential. But sometimes, and this is where we are, I think, sometimes in this cultural moment. Sometimes they're un-Christ-like. Sometimes there are instances where they are anti-Christ-like. And the reason these catch on, and you know this because you're smart people, okay? And those of you who are watching, you're smart, you get this. The reason these new fads and these ideas the reason they catch on is because they always appeal to a group of people. They like it. We like it. We like being right, and we like the fact that somebody else is wrong. There are certain personality types, there are certain people, you enjoy having an enemy. In fact, you almost require an enemy to be happy because it confirms your suspicions about how right you are. And I'm the same way. So consequently, the reason these new and novel ideas get intertwined in and get elevated to the point of being essential or fundamental, they catch on because they appeal to a group self-interest. They confirm or fuel an existing bias. Oftentimes they support a cultural movement. And as we've seen even recently in our country, sometimes they support a political movement. And what makes it so difficult is that always, 100% of the time, these new and novel ideas are supported by something in the Bible. And the leaders of these movements or the leaders of these traditions, and again, sometimes I think, we can't judge somebody's motive, and things change over time, but every single one of these new fads and traditional things and things in the past that we think are crazy and things that are in the future that people are if we heard about them now, we think there's no way the church will ever embrace that. 100% of the time, the leaders or the people that bring these ideas to the surface and make them dogma and doctrine, they support them with teaching or verses or their interpretation of verses from the Bible. They always seem to line up with the Bible, but not the teaching of Jesus, not the person of Jesus. That oftentimes, even the non-harmful ones, as well as the harmful ones, conflict with what we call, because the Apostle Paul named it this, the law of Christ. And what happens is, over time, they justify and encourage a tone and a posture and an approach that is anything but Christ-like. And when that happens in a faith tradition or a church or a group of churches or even a denomination, mature like you and honest people feel like, you know what, can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. I know you got chapter and verse. I just don't think Jesus was like that. If this is how we have to treat people in order to be a part of this movement, then I'm out. So mature, thoughtful people step away from their church. But here's the catch, and here's maybe your story. If their church is the only version of Christianity they know, They feel like they don't have any choice but to step not just away from their church, but to step completely away from Christianity. Because the version of the version of Christianity they were raised with, for them, that is Christianity. And so in their, or maybe in your zeal, to separate themselves, or maybe to separate yourself from something unhealthy and harmful. I cannot stay in a church that teaches that. I cannot stay in a church that treats people that way. I cannot stay in a faith tradition that sees the world that way. In their zeal, or in your zeal to separate yourself from something unhealthy and harmful, which we should all do, you separate yourself from something that's valuable and important. And again, maybe this is your story, right? I'll take some water. It's right there next to me. Thank you. I'll take the one on top of the chair there. Thanks. Thank you so much, Karen. Everybody nervous now? There's no like. One time, quick story. I got to preach at Saddleback Church, Rick Warren's church one time, and sounded like I needed water. This lady comes down, and I didn't know what I was like, uh-oh. And the security got up and got her, and she held up a bottle of water. Anyway. So, maybe in your zeal or in their zeal to separate themselves from something unhealthy or harmful, they separate themselves from something valuable and important. Again, this may be your story. In fact, some of you, because I've heard this story so often through the years, you grow up with a father who won't have anything to do with church, and you're like, Dad, you know what? And he's just like, nope. No organized religion for me. And maybe he told you part of the story, but you know from listening to your dad, there was something happened back there that was so, so disconcerting, so bothersome, so harmful. He's just done with church. And you've tried to tell your dad, not all churches are alike. He's like, nope, I'm out. I'm just out. Or maybe your mom, was married to your stepdad, and he was abusive. And she went to her pastor, her priest, and her pastor or priest says, you got to go home. You have to submit to your husband. You got to stay in there. And it almost killed her. And she's done. She'll never have anything to do with organized religion. And neither will you because of how the church responded or treated somebody you love. Or maybe it's a brother or a sister, and the church says, oh, they're going to hell. And you're like, they're like the kindest person I've ever met. If that's what the church teaches, I am out. And you wonder, and you should wonder, Does Christianity have anything valuable and important to offer me? And if that's you, I understand, believe it or not, and I get it. I understand why you threw baby Jesus out with the bathwater, because your church or your church tradition made it impossible to distinguish between the two. But there's another group of people, and maybe this is you. There's another group who doesn't just abandon church and abandon a faith and abandon the whole thing. They just decide, you know what, I'm just going to leave the church. I'm not leaving my faith, but I cannot be a part of that. I can't be a part of organized religion. And they begin the process, and this is certainly a current term people are talking a lot about. They begin, or maybe you began to deconstruct your faith. Because you still believe in God. And you still believe in baby Jesus. You believe in Jesus. But you just had to, or maybe you're in the process of deciding, you know what, I just need to step away for a minute. I've got to step away from organized religion, kind of catch my breath. I've got to figure out what's really fundamental. I got to figure out what's really essential and what's not. And you're pretty confident what's not. You know what you feel like you need to leave behind, and you feel pretty confident you know what everyone needs to leave behind. And I just want to say something to you. If you're in that process, good for you. Mature of you. Honest of you. Because you've been honest enough to acknowledge that a faith or a faith system or a church system, a faith that can't be questioned, can't be trusted. And now you're trying to figure out what's worth hanging on to. So I'm going to tell you what's worth hanging on to. Hang on to baby Jesus. That's what you got to hang on to. In fact, I almost put up here, hang on to baby Jesus, baby, but that was kind of weird, okay? This is what we're going to discover together for the next few weeks. Because at the center of our faith isn't a building. At the center of our faith isn't a system. At the center of our faith isn't a systematic theology. At the center of our faith is a person. And some of you who are in the process of trying to figure it out because you've stepped away, you are wise enough and mature enough and smart enough to know that. But you're asking a very important question. That's why we're talking about it. So what do I have to believe? I know some things I just can't possibly believe because it just doesn't fit with the world I live in. But what must I believe? And one of the things that makes this so difficult, and one of the reasons I'm so glad our high school seniors are with us, and I'm so glad that you stayed with our student ministry through these years, is that traditionally, and I get the complexity of this, I mean, this is what I do for a living. Traditionally, the church hasn't created much space for faith to be questioned. In fact, some church traditions, if you ask the question, asking a question kind of mitigates against the church's authority. And if you ask a question that mitigates against the church's authority and you feel like you're kind of on the outs, well, then consequently, your faith it can grow within a cultural context or a church context, but your faith can't grow up. And unfortunately, church systems oftentimes don't provide space to determine what's essential versus what's traditional, versus what's comfortable, versus what's tribal, versus what's familial. I love this quote by Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong, as a young woman who was seeking to be a church leader, had a terrible church experience. And consequently, she just hit eject and just abandoned any kind of structured, organized religion. She became a famous author. I've read probably half a dozen of her books. And in one of her books, I stumbled across this quote, and I think it's so instructive. Here's what she said. She said, we learned about God about the same time we were told about Santa Claus when we were children, right? But while our understanding of the Santa Claus phenomenon evolved and matured, our theology remained somewhat infantile. In other words, in every other area of life, we're allowed to grow, mature, and evolve and expand. But sometimes when it comes to theology, sometimes when it comes to religion, sometimes when it comes to church, it's like, here's the box, stay ye in it. And if ye get out of thy box, you are in trouble with God because we have the God box. And over here's another faith tradition going, we got the God box. And somebody over here is going, oh, no. We got a God box and it's really small, okay? And it's only for a certain, we got a big giant God box. You can do pretty much anything over in our God box. Everybody is just, but where do we allow faith to grow up, to mature? Here's my observation. Faith that's not allowed to grow up because you're in a faith system or tradition that has all the answers and consequently has allowed essentials to become non-essentials to become essentials, non-fundamentals to become fundamental. Faith is not allowed to grow up, will be deconstructed. Intentionally, a process that maybe you find yourself in, or maybe your son or daughter finds themselves in, or one of your grandchildren, or eventually. Either we deconstruct our childhood faith or life deconstructs it for us. Because faith that doesn't grow up can't stand up to the rigors of life and adulthood and living in a broken world. That life is just too hard on simplistic, simple, they told me what to believe and I believe it kind of unquestioned faith. Faith that goes unexamined or unquestioned, it gets cul-de-saced. And here's what I mean by that. And in my world, these are the stories we hear all the time. And again, this may be your story or it may sound like your story. Somebody says, I go to a church and they say, God parted the waters and the good guys passed through and all the bad guys drowned. But preacher, I got to tell you, I feel like I'm drowning and I'm one of the good guys and all the bad guys are safely on the other shore and life is going swimmingly for them, even though I'm the one who's having to swim. It's not working for me. And I believe and I listen to the sermons, but I just feel like I'm going round and round and round and I'm about to hit eject. I'm out. The formula isn't working for you. The formula didn't work for your sister. The formula didn't work for your brother or your mother. Why didn't the C part for you? Why didn't the C part for them? And somebody says, you got to have more faith, you got to pray harder. And finally, they just quit giving answers and just move on and keep talking positive to all the people who've yet to face something like you're being forced to walk through. Why did Goliath win? I was told that I'm David and all my circumstances and all the bad in the world and all my financial problems and my marriage problems and, that's Goliath. And I have faith in me, little David, I'm going to beat Goliath. But I'm telling you, Goliath is beating me. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with what I believe? What has happened? Is there anything true about any of this? And you're cul-de-saced. Because somewhere along the way, somebody didn't let your faith grow up. And I'm not picking on you. I mean, this is something we're all going to wrestle with. You're in a faith tradition, and from your perspective, this is Christianity. And it's not working, and it doesn't work, and you feel like I either have to leave it completely or I have to step away from it and rethink it. So in this series, we're going to do our best, I'm going to do my best, to strip it down to the sticks, to take it down to the foundation, and ask the question, what is actually literally fundamental to our faith? We're going to attempt to answer the question, as I said up at the beginning, what must one believe in order to be a faithful follower of Jesus? What must one believe? I mean, there's lots of add-ons and lots of interesting things to talk about, but what is core? What's essential? What's fundamental? Or, to put it another way, what's baby and what's bathwater? So, in our few minutes we have remaining today, I want to go ahead and just jump in, get this party started, okay? But I need you to use your imagination. It's the year about 30, AD 30. There's no church. There's no Bible. There's no the Bible. There's no Christian theology. There are no hymns. There's no Sunday school. There's no choir. There's no Christian theology. AD 30, we're in Judea or Galilee. And all there is the law and the prophets, what we would consider part of our Old Testament. There's Rome occupying our hometown. There's the temple. There's a temple system that we have a feeling is corrupt. We think they're getting rich off of our offerings. We have lots and lots of questions, lots and lots of tension, culturally, politically. And there's one other thing. There's an unusual rabbi from Nazareth who is drawing enormous crowds. He's wreaking havoc with the status quo. He's making both Rome and both the empire and the temple establishment nervous. Telling these amazing stories that sometimes we understand and sometimes we don't. But there's still no church and there's no Christianity. And one afternoon, about 2.5 years into his mission, Jesus and his 12 apostles are way, way, way up about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, as far away from the big city of Jerusalem as they can almost possibly get, in a region called Caesarea Philippi, which is important because it was named, Herod the Great named that region for his son Philip, thus Philippi. Philip renamed it for Tiberius Caesar, consequently Caesar, so it's Tiberius, Caesarea Philippi, the region with two names. And maybe they're walking along talking about how in the world did this region get named with two names. And we jump into the story as we discover our first fundamental. When Jesus came, you've heard this before. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, hey, we know how this region got named. Who do people say I am? Who do people say the Son of Man is? And he uses this title from Daniel. This is a title that God would give the one that he would allow to judge all the nations at the end of time. And Jesus is claiming this for himself. Who do people say the Son of Man is? And the reason he asked this question, this is an important question. He knew this was essential. It was fundamental for them to get this question, the answer to this question right. In other words, he's saying, who do you think I am? Or our version is, who do you think Jesus is? And they replied, well, there's a lot of talk on the street about you, Jesus. They replied, some say John the Baptist, who had been recently executed. He died recently. Others say Elijah. He died a long time ago. Others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets, and all the prophets have been dead a long time. So they're saying, some people think you're like a reincarnated prophet because you speak like a prophet. Others think that you've just come in the power or the spirit of an Old Testament, or what they would say, one of our prophets. And Jesus smiles, they're walking along. He says, okay, you tell me what everybody else thinks. You guys have been with me for a while. What about you? This is the question. Who do you say I am? It's an important question. This is important in terms of what we believe in order to move forward in being a faithful follower of Jesus. And if you'll remember, Simon Peter, he always spoke first. Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah. You want to know what I think? I don't know about these guys. I think you're the Messiah. I think you are in some ways the unique Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, don't get carried away, Peter. Seriously, Who do you guys think I am? Okay, that's not actually in the Bible. Oh, that was a Bible quiz. You all failed. Okay, anyway, that's not what he said. So he's asking, now this is, back to his question, okay? Peter's answer, I don't want to go, and again, some of us are so familiar with this, I don't want to rush by this. Peter's answer is a lot. Here's the weight of his answer. Peter is saying, we believe you are God's final king. That's what Messiah means. Messiah is anointed one. The priest or a prophet would anoint a man to make him the king. They're saying, we believe not a priest and not a prophet. We believe God our Father has anointed you to be his final king, not just of Palestine, not just Judea and Samaria, and not just of Galilee. We believe that this is amazing, that you are the king of the world, that you are in fact the Son of Man, that in some strange way you are going to judge the nations at the end of time. And because of that, of course, you're his king because you're his son. It's a dynasty, and God the Father has made his son the king of everything. And here you are in a body, standing out in the sun, in sandals, walking everywhere you go. Now, here's the question I want to ask you. Don't rush ahead. Don't add on to everything else you know that you've learned in church. Let's just pause in this moment. What if Peter is right? What if that's true? What if Jesus is God's final king? Shouldn't everyone in that region just stop and stare? No wonder that thousands of people crowded everywhere he went. Shouldn't everybody tremble in fear? Shouldn't everybody just bow and worship? Shouldn't everybody just submit unconditionally and say, Jesus, the answer is yes. I don't even know what the question is, but yes. Shouldn't everybody follow? Are you kidding me? God has come to dwell with us, and he showed up in human form so we could understand God, which means, listen to this, that every time Jesus spoke, it was the literal words of God. This is why every morning I wake up and I get my Bible out and I read something either Jesus said or something his first century followers who knew him said about him every single morning. What could possibly be more important than knowing what God said when he sent his son into this world? And Peter's like, you are God in a body, and when you speak, it's like God is speaking. You are our king. If this is true, I love what Crawford Loritz says. If this is true, then Jesus cannot be a reference point. Oh, I believe in Jesus. Jesus has to become everything. Lord, King, God in a body, and acknowledging who Jesus is, what Jesus is, or what Jesus is to you or me or us is fundamental. And here's the cool thing. Jesus doesn't blink. Jesus is like, okay, you exaggerate a little bit. Hey, no. He leans in, he replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For what you just said about me, this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood. In other words, you're smart. You're not that smart. You're insightful, but you don't have that much insight. This was not revealed to you by anyone else, and you didn't come up with it on your own. It was, get this, that answer came to you from my Father in heaven. Peter, you are exactly right. I am God's final king. When I speak, it's like God speaking. When I reprimand, it's like God reprimanding. When I encourage, it's like God encouraging. When I step into someone's circumstances and get involved, it's like God stepping into their circumstances and getting involved. When I pause on my way somewhere to take care of somebody in need, it's like God pausing to take care of somebody in need. When I call out hypocrisy in a religious system, it's like God calling out hypocrisy. In a religious, let me just ask you this, okay, whether you're a Christian or not, a believer or not, whatever your faith tradition is, just think for a moment. If this is true, and you have access to the gospel of Matthew or Mark or Luke or John, Why would we not wake up every single day of our lives? We have the opportunity to read the words of God from Jesus, his King and Son. Wow. Now, fun fact, little church history for you. This declaration that Peter made, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God, this is amazing. This is the only thing that the church has consistently agreed upon since the first century. That's it. Not baptism, not who gets baptized, not when, how we do communion, who gets to be a member. I mean, all kind of traditions, all kind of rules and restrictions, all kinds of, fine print with churches and traditions. The only thing from the beginning that every Christian church tradition has agreed on is that, which means this is fundamental to our faith. In fact, it's so fundamental, it organizes and prioritizes everything else. And the challenge for you, if you're going to be a Jesus follower, the challenge for me, if I'm going to be a Jesus follower, not just a believer, a follower, is that I have to accept and acknowledge and submit to the reality that Jesus is God in a body and God's final King. So the first on our fundamental list, and we're going to make a list throughout this series, is simply this. Number one is Jesus is God's Son and our King. If you're going to be a faithful follower of Jesus, you have to believe this. And the reason you can believe this is not because Matthew wrote it. The reason you can believe this is because Jesus said it. And in that moment, this is amazing, in that moment, all 12 of his disciples apparently believed it. And then life happened. And then life got complicated. And then things didn't go as they expect, and they all quit believing it. Like us. Their faith was too infantile. It was too buttoned up. God's in a box. God wins. God is here. God wins. God can't lose. God can't be killed. We know how the whole thing's going to play out. It doesn't play out the way they think it's going to play out, and suddenly they just have to put their box down. Because they watch their king die. Game over. Unfollow. And yet these are the men that brought us the story we're talking about today. Because when he rose from the dead, they followed and surrendered to him as God's final King. This is fundamental. This is where it all begins, because this is where it all began. And everything flows from that. If you're clear on that, honestly, if you're clear on this one idea, pretty much everything else is detail. But it's important detail. And we're going to dive into some of that detail in part 2 of our series, The Fundamental List, Recovering the Essentials of Our Faith. I hope you won't miss any of this series. Heavenly Father, thank you for preserving this amazing conversation. Thank you for making it way more simple than we make it. Thank you for speaking in such a way that, honestly, we can understand it. And Father, I pray for the man or woman, the teenager, the college student, the grad student, the senior adult, who just has so many questions and life has gone so the wrong way for them, and they're wondering, why am I not winning? Why is Goliath winning? Why am I the one in the sea? Why am I the one outside the ark? Why isn't it working for me? Where is God? I pray that, Father, maybe something they heard today would give them hope. And that literally, if we let go of everything else, that we would hang on to Jesus, who came to live as one of us so we could know what the Father is like. So give us wisdom to know what to do with what we just heard. Give us the courage to do it. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Such a helpful, practical series as we go into these couple of weeks. And I hope that you'll plan to continue this conversation. And in order to help you do that, maybe alongside your family members, maybe with your small group, maybe over lunch that you're headed to here in a little bit, I want to leave you with 3 questions. We're going to put these on the screen. Is there anything related to Christianity that you once believed that you now no longer believe? and why? Question 2, have you ever been tempted to walk away from faith completely or partially, temporarily? If so, why? And if not, why not? And thirdly, what doctrine of the Christian faith do you have the most difficult time accepting? And follow up, are you sure that it's one of the fundamentals? So as you start this conversation, obviously it's one that will continue, so you won't want to miss week 2 as we lean back into this conversation next Sunday. And for those of you who are our guests today, thank you so much for spending your morning alongside us. And as you leave, like Morgan said, when you go out these doors, head to your left and stop by the studio so you can grab that gift quickly before you head out the door. And for anybody who's newer to our church, I hope that you'll plan to meet me in the next room, which is out these doors and right around the corner. It's directly across from the studio. And I would love the chance to meet you, to answer some of your questions, and to explain some behind-the-scenes information about our church. We'll start that in 1 minute, and we'll continue watching your children. So for those of you who are newer, I'll see you in 1 minute. For everybody else, I'll see you next week. Have a wonderful week.